If you've been in the audio industry for any period of time, you're probably very familiar with the name Neve. I mean, they have made some really great and legendary products over the years. Things such as preamps and EQs like we see with the 1073 channel strip. But they've made some other really great products over the years, such as their Portico 5033. But unless you have a grand line around to be able to pick up one of these pieces of hardware, it might seem like it's just outside of your reach. That is, until today. We have a company named Noiseash that made their own variation of this same EQ called the NEED 533. And today we're going to be doing a walkthrough on how to use this plugin. But before that, like what we always do, let's first go ahead and roll that intro. So the Noiseash NEED 533 EQ is obviously a play on the Rupert Neve Portico 5033 EQ. Now, if you're not familiar with this piece of hardware, this is a 5-band EQ that includes 2 shelves, one for the high and one for the low, and 3 parametric EQs for in between. Now, not only did Noiseash just replicate this piece of hardware, they've added some additional features for their users to be able to use. Let's go ahead and now jump into Pro Tools and do a quick walkthrough to go over all the controls and parameters of this EQ and see what those additional features are, and of course, take a listen to it. All right, so I have the 533 loaded up in front of us, and as you can see, this thing looks remarkably similar to the original Neve Portico 5033. Now, one thing you will also notice, it looks as if there are 2 copies of the EQ inside this plugin. The reason why this is because you can use this specific plugin in either stereo or mid-side mode. And because of this, they have this link function here. What that means is if I make a change on the left-hand side here, you can see that same change happening on the right. If we want to disable this, we can go ahead and turn off the link function here and go ahead and make our adjustments however we want to. For now, I'll go ahead and keep them linked for this demonstration, but just know that that is there and available for you should you want to use it. All right. What I now want to do next is go over all the parameters on the channel strip itself, starting from top to bottom, and then we'll go ahead and move towards this middle section to see what additional features Noiseash has given to that. So let's go ahead and look at that next. All right, so looking at the low pass filter first at the top of the channel here, in order to engage it, because as you can see here, it's disabled, all we're gonna do is click this little LED button and it'll go ahead and activate it. Now, with the low pass filter, we do have this knob to be able to control it. It starts at 22,000 Hertz, but as you can see here in QClone, when we go ahead and move this to the left, it goes all the way down to 4K. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to what that sounds like with our acoustic guitar. Here we go. Awesome, great. So now let's go ahead and look at the high band now. So for the high band, this is gonna be different than the other 3 bands in the middle because the 3 bands are going to be parametric EQs. The high and low band are actually going to just be shelf EQs. So the only parameters that we're gonna get available to us is going to be able to change whatever frequency we wanna manipulate, as well as going ahead and reducing or increasing the gain. So let's go ahead and try that out. I gotta say, I really like the way that sounds. It sounds very, very musical. I like it a lot. So now that we looked at the high band, let's go ahead and look at the next 3 bands because they're all very similar. Okay, here we go. So for the next 3 bands, they're going to be, as I mentioned before, your standard parametric EQ. We're going to have, let me go ahead and put this back to the center, our gain knob to go ahead and increase or decrease. We also do, let me turn that up a little bit. We have our frequency knob as well, so that way we can go ahead and select what frequency we want to use. But then we do also have our Q as well. So let's go ahead, let's lower the frequency to somewhere in the middle. Let's go ahead and do 1.8. We can now go ahead and decide how narrow or how wide we want this EQ to be, this specific band. So let's go ahead and listen to that again now, and I'm gonna put it back at the default settings. Let's play back our guitar and listen to what this sounds like. Man, again, one thing I can't get over is how good this EQ sounds. It does sound very, very musical. Now, I don't know if it's just because of the acoustic guitars that we're working with. They already sound very well, but just adding this a little bit of flavor with this EQ sounds great. All right, so now that I demonstrated on this band, I'm gonna go ahead and make it a little bit quicker for us with this video here. The next two bands operate exactly the same way. We do have, again, our ability to change the gain, to change the size of the cue. The only difference is going to be the frequencies that we're working with. Here at the top band, it goes all the way from 1.8, so 1,800 hertz, all the way to 16K. However, if we want to work with the middle band, it goes all the way from 330 hertz to 2.5K. With the lower band here, it goes all the way from 50 hertz to 400. So this gives us the ability to have a little bit of bleed over between each of the different bands and be able to tailor the sound the way we want it to be. All right. Now with that all being said and done, let's look at this last band, which is the low shelf band. So all we're gonna do is just increase it here, as we can see, and we can adjust this all the way from 30 hertz all the way to 300. So gives you a healthy amount of frequencies to also be able to work with. All right, last thing I want to look at before looking at the middle section is actually this high pass filter here. So again, works very similar to the low pass filter. All we need to do is just engage it by clicking this button. Now that we see the LED line we can actually see here in QClone that it's already working. And this starts all the way from 20 hertz, and we can go ahead and roll it all the way up to 200 hertz. So that is all of the parameters inside of the channel strip. It's a fairly straightforward EQ to work with, but now what I want to go ahead and do is show you some of the features that we have in the middle to work with that gives us a little bit more leverage when using this type of EQ. So let's go ahead and look at that next. So we finally made it to the middle section of this plugin, and to start talking about it, it's actually best to talk about a few different parameters at the same time just because of how they interact with one another. So let's go ahead and take a look. At the very top of the middle section, you can see we have three buttons. We have the left side middle mute, we have mid side mode, and then we have right channel side mute. So what this pertains to is whether you're muting only the left channel or the middle if it's a mid-side mode, or if you're engaging the mid-side mode in general, or are you muting the right channel or the side? So that might sound a little complicated, so I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate. But before we can do that, what we need to make sure to do is click this blink button and disable it. So it's disabled. So what that means now for us is if I press play, and I go ahead and click this button while it's still in stereo mode, and we know it's not in mid-side mode because it's not engaged, you're actually gonna hear there's nothing that's gonna be playing on the left-hand side and only on the right. So let's take a listen to that. And same thing is true on the right-hand side. So if we go ahead and now mute the right-hand side and take a listen. Perfect, okay. But what about mid-side mode? That's another feature that they keep talking about that you can use this EQ in, so let's try that out. So for mid-side mode, again, to engage it, make sure that this link section is disabled preferably. Let's go ahead and now turn this on, and now listen what happens when we go ahead and mute the middle here. Let's take a listen. Sounds weird hearing only that side information, but yes, that's exactly what it does. And if we go ahead and mute the sides now, we'll get this very mono sounding signal. Perfect, great. So another thing to also note about mid-side mode, you can see on the left channel, this is labeled as left, middle, and then on the other channel, it's right side. So what this means is any changes that you now make while this is in mid-side mode on the left channel, it's actually going to be applying those changes only to the information that's happening in the middle of the audio source. And again, this is also going to be true for the right-hand side of this channel, but only to the side information. So you can work on those different pieces of audio sources independently from one another. So that is cool to see. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put this back into stereo and link this back up. We do have our faders here to go ahead and adjust the volume of it as well. Again, I'm just gonna leave it for 0 for now, but if you want to, again, you can go ahead and obviously adjust this to whatever you would like to. Another thing that we also have here is this all bypass mode. Now, when this is linked, you can go ahead and bypass everything on both sides. If it's unlinked, you can go ahead and bypass one separately from one another. We'll go ahead and leave them linked for now. But what I want to start talking to you about is this Nuance deviation. This is super cool. So let's talk about that next. So nuance deviation pertains to the idea that no two pieces of hardware sound exactly the same. The best way to describe this is think of like a mixing console, something that has 24, 32, 48 channels, whatever it may be. Let's say you have channel 1 and 2 on that console. They're going to sound slightly different from one another, and that's because there's no such thing as a perfect replica. Again, there's going to be a slight nuance or deviation between what those sound like. So what Noiseash is actually giving us here on the 533 is the ability to have different sounding channels on the left and right side or your mid side. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. Right now, this is set to channel 1 on both sides. And we've heard the guitar. Let's play back a small little piece again, remind ourselves. Great, let's go ahead and now change this. Let's go ahead and put this to like 10, and this we'll go ahead and do 7. Now let's see if we can hear the difference. It's very, very subtle. What we also have here though is going to be this random button. And what happens when we click on it, it will randomly pick different channels, 1 out of 20, because they give you up to 20 channels to be able to experiment with here to give you a different sound. So to demonstrate this a little better, I'm gonna go ahead and bring this back to the default settings, which is 1 and 1 on each channel. And I'll go ahead and click the random button as we're playing it and see if you can hear the difference. Here we go. That's so cool. The fact that we haven't even done anything with this EQ, there's no changes whatsoever, but you can hear a slight difference from the left to the right side. So that's something I really wish things like Wave would start doing with some of their plugins. They do it for the NLS. That's a whole design behind the NLS, but it's great to see that this is happening on just an EQ. So really cool to see. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at some of these bottom parameters here before we wrap this up. All right, so just below the nuance deviation, we have our trim knob, which will allow us to go ahead and adjust the gain of our signal after our EQ change. So obviously we can turn this to the left, turn this to the right, and it works just as intended. But there's a nice little feature here that it's kind of hidden if you're not paying attention to it, and that's this even harmonics. This actually looks like a flathead screw, but what happens is that you can actually turn this left to right. And when you turn this more to the right, to 100%, it's actually going to add some additional harmonics to your sound, giving even more color to it. So to go ahead and demonstrate this the best way possible, I've actually already made a preset called Acoustic Guitar, where I've made some EQ changes, and we can see that happening on Q-Clone on the right-hand side, and this is set to 0. When I go ahead and play this back, take a listen to what happens as I start to turn this. So here we go, let's take a listen. Awesome. So you could probably hear that sound. It's very, very subtle, but again, it's just adding some additional harmonics if you want to go ahead and add a little bit more color to whatever audio source you're working with. I can see this being a really cool feature to use on things such as snares and kicks. So just keep that in mind in case you want to use that in the future. All right, last couple parameters here. We do have our input, and we also do have our output to, again, adjust the gain going into the plugin and then coming out. And lastly, we have a width parameter here. This is not something you see every day on most plugins. What this will do, it's set to 100%, which is the default setting here. If we go ahead and bring this down to 0, it'll give us a mono signal. But then if we turn it past 100, which we can do here, we can go all the way up to 200, it'll give a more exaggerated sound to the sides, giving us more width. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what that sounds like now. Awesome. And now we've looked at all the parameters for the Noiseash NEED 533. All right, so that is the Noiseash NEED 533. What did you think about it? You probably already know what I think though. I think it sounds amazing and I'm excited to use this in my future mixes. Now, before you leave though, I would just simply ask if you would consider leaving a like and subscribing if you did enjoy this content. It does help the channel grow. Now, if you're also looking for similar content like this, I recently did a walkthrough of the Waves API 550A and the 550B. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check that out. And with that being said, thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And like I always say, happy mixing.